introduce if Dr. Kenneth Ramsey would come up, and he wants to share a little bit. And what a blessing he's been to me. What a blessing he's been to the Y.O.U. organization. And I just want to say thank you to him, and give him a hand, please.
I'm a lot older than Joe, and I have some things here that have to keep me organized so that we can get out of here on time, so I stay on point. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation, Joe, to be here. I've worked in the field of drug and alcohol treatment for 47 years. And I'm not a recovering person, but I grew up in an alcoholic family. It was my dad. So I know the problem from the inside family aspect. I knew enough way back then to know that it wasn't just his problem, but it was, the family problem. And I reflected back on 47 years in the drug and alcohol rehab field, 36 of which as CEO of Gateway Rehab, retired about 2 years ago. And when Joe invited me, my initial reaction was, no, I'm not sure what I can offer Joe. So I thought about the experience that I've had and the things that stand out to me. And I arrived at 4 themes. None of this will be real new to you. But what's new is you probably never heard it from a non-faith-based drug and alcohol rehab program director. So here are my four themes. Joe gave half of my speech, so I apologize for some repetition here. Addiction, as you know who've experienced it, is an extraordinarily complex, in my estimation, spiritual disease for both the individual with it and the family. Now, in the field, we talk a lot about addiction as a biopsychosocial, and then in parentheses, spiritual illness. Well, most diseases are biopsychosocial. There's always a biological or a genetic component which has psychological and social implications. But not enough people concentrate or give attention to the spiritual component. And after spending all those years working with probably in total of 150,000 people and families with addictive diseases, the spiritual part, the spiritual gap, the spiritual hole in the soul that a lot of those people that I saw had stand out to me. There's a lot of very good research going on now about the science of addiction and how it's related to brain chemistry. And it's very good work. I applaud it. There seems to be, to me, a frantic effort to go out and find this magic pill that's going to stop it all. But the magic pill, I think, is inside and above us. It's the meditation and the attention to the will of God. That's really what's necessary. As Joe indicated, addiction starts very slowly. It's different for just about everybody. Some people, like Joe, are driven to that because they really like the high. They like that feeling. Others accept a challenge or a risk. Others want to be accepted, be part of a crowd, to fit in, to overcome insecurities, hurts, possibly. Eventually, it becomes an overwhelming, out of control, and as Joe said, demonic battle that takes control of one's life, relationships, will, morals, and soul. Parents usually find out about the problem quite late, after trouble surfaces or things disappear from the house or other kinds of issues come up. And then they struggle with the anger, the issues of accountability and honesty, and just the complete puzzlement about what do I do? To whom do I turn? That's addiction. Recovery for the addict requires a spiritual awakening. You've heard this. This is a sudden realization. It's as if something is happening that comes in from the outside and not something that our own brain conjured up, that becomes transformative. It changes our lives. And it makes one realize that he or she cannot continue the path, the destructive path. And they're tired of that, and they need to make a change. This is a point where a lot of men and women came up to me and have told me that this is what caused them to literally drop on their knees in an emotional prayer and a plea for God to help and release them from the captivity of addiction. And it's very clear to me over the years that ultimately one's got to surrender his broken life to God and accept the fact that it is God's will. God's in charge. He directs what's going on. Without that spiritual awakening, there can be false recovery. It's not going to be long-lasting. And it won't be for the right purposes. The third thing I want to share that stands out for me is a recovery for the family as well as for the addict. Requires ongoing prayer and ongoing effort. Every day requires the work, the prayer, and the effort. I say work because it gives us an opportunity to see that we've got to do something and just not sit back and wait for God to do it. Ignatius of Loyola once said that you must pray as if everything depended upon God and work as if everything depended on you. And that is so very important. There are a lot of ways to pray and have a conversation with God. But I look at the serenity prayer, which we all know and sometimes dismiss as being cliche, or maybe that it's not biblically based, it's not in the Bible. It has many biblical themes that I'll point out. But the serenity prayer is extremely powerful. Let me just go over the 3 lines of the serenity prayer that we all know. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. We all want to be in control. Everybody wants to have things done his way or her way. It's hard to accept there are things that you can't control or change. And this acceptance is not a resignation, but a welcoming disposition of acceptance. Serenity is the peace that comes from prayer and surrender to the will of God. In John 14:22, God says, "My peace I leave with you." It's the biblical theme for that line. Serenity is peace. The second line is the courage to change the things I can, to pray for strength and hope. In Isaiah 41:10, God says, "Do not be afraid, I am with you." And the third line, the wisdom to know the difference. The wisdom is not about knowing things. It's about a discernment. It's about a feeling or knowing, if you will, when to accept something and when to challenge it. So that discernment comes from prayer as well. Now, the serenity prayer goes on, and I won't go through the entire thing, but the next 2 lines, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time. What does that mean? If you look at the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread," we're talking about asking for the help that we need for today. Not for the hearing that's scheduled 3 weeks from now. Not for what other people are going to say tomorrow, but for what I need today. This prayer is really powerful, and I strongly recommend taking another look at that if you haven't for a while. And the fourth thing I've left the field with has to do with operations manuals. You buy a car or a television or just about anything, it comes with an owner's manual, an operations manual that tells you how to make it work, how to make it work efficiently. Most corporations, most companies have policy manuals, have operations manuals. Gateway had many of them. And it occurred to me that one of the best operations manuals for life certainly is the Bible. I'm not dismissing that. That's probably on the top of the definitely on the top of the list. But I'm looking at supplementing that with something else. And that's the Spiritual Operations Manual for a Life in Recovery, being the spiritually based 12 steps of AA. I'm not talking about going off and go to meetings. I'm talking about those 12 steps that Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson wrote that looked like, to me, they were divinely inspired. They're spiritual all the way through. On step 11, he talks about the importance of meditation and prayer so that you can surrender to the will of God, understand what God wants of you, and accept that He is in charge. In my time, those 47 years, especially the last 36 at Gateway, we did a study at one point of 200 or so people over 3 years, looking at recovery and spirituality and attendance at AA meetings and following the 12 steps. And at the end of that study, we found that every single person who stopped attending meetings, who discontinued going to meetings after a short time, and didn't follow the spiritual 12 steps, had a relapse. Every single person. Now, I'm not in AA, and I know a lot of folks get turned off sometimes to the meetings, and I've heard comments from many patients who say, I don't want to go back there. There's just a bunch of old guys talking about drunk stories. Or there's a bunch of kids talking about drugs. I don't feel comfortable. I don't fit in. Well, I don't really even care if you go to meetings, but the 12 steps, read them, get a copy of it. The first 3 talk about your own powerless, and it doesn't matter what you're recovering from. It doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol. It could be anything. Overeating, overspending, what have you. That you recognize your powerlessness without God's help to handle these problems. And then the following steps talk about identifying your own character defects, your moral weaknesses, sharing them with someone else, asking God to forgive you, helping others achieve the same level that you have. To me, the 12 steps in the Bible combined make a powerful operations manual for our lives. Typically, those 12 steps require a spiritual guide, or as they say in AA, a sponsor, someone who can help through these steps, because long-term use of any chemical is going to really fog the brain, and it's going to take years to begin to think clearly. And so there's a need for that spiritual director, that spiritual advisor to help through this process. Well, that's kind of it. It's work, pray, meditate. Pray as hard as you can, like God's going to fix it, and work as hard as you can, like you're going to fix it. Thank you so much, Jeff.